afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can I thank Keith for the introduction and also Ian for inviting me along today. I thought it was really interesting there that one of the very first things in Tom's video and the backdrop to a number of his slides was in fact a train. And it's one of the things that we at ScotRail and Abellio, since taking over the franchise, have actually recognised. And one of the key commitments that we've made to the Scottish Government and in the work that we've been doing with the Business Improvement District Scotland is that commitment to understand and make greater connectivity with the communities that we support and serve and operate within. I want to just give some background information, just possibly for some of our international guests about ScotRail. It's very unique in the United Kingdom because effectively we operate the majority of the trains that run throughout the country. And for a population of 6 million, we actually serve over 93 million passengers a year. And of that 93 million passengers, there's between 35 and 40% of that are not commuters, but are actually about visitors and tourists and so forth. And it's really important for us in ScotRail to understand where we're going to get to. And I think for the business improvement districts, whether they be localities or whether they be tourism-based or thematic-based, but by 2025, we expect to see over 129 million passengers journeys taking place. And they're from destination to destination. And the importance of that is it's all about connecting. And I'm going to touch very much today on a lot of the physical connections. But ultimately, the goal I think we all have is to actually ensure that our physical connections actually meet the digital connections. Because everyone can see that in just about every country in the world, the digital connectivity is of the highest standard. In terms of, I think it was mentioned today at one of the presentations, there are more mobile phones in the world than there are people. And the fact that, we are all having to change the way in which we do business. We have, we talk now about having a web page. And in fact, the majority of our connectivity is not at all through our web page. It's actually through a variety of number of apps that we have. So it's vitally important that we look at connections beyond simply the infrastructure. But that's what I'm going to touch upon, but be quite clear that it's not where we see the business going as a whole. And it's about change. So you may ask, well, why is someone from ScotRail standing up here talking to business improvement districts? And the confession as I have is that I suspect just about every single person in this room, including Keith, know more about railways than possibly I do. Because that's not why I was employed by Abellio and by ScotRail. My background was very much in economic regeneration and town centre regeneration. I was very fortunate to do a number of successful schemes in Irvine and Kilwinning and all around the country. But I was brought in by the company to look at how we could be different and look at how we could actually connect with communities in a more positive and more proactive way. And it's a very simple philosophy that the journey is just not about A to B, and that the railway network and all of our infrastructure has a much greater role to play. Because it's got to be seen as a catalyst for economic development. It's got to be seen as a way of tackling social exclusion. One of the key challenges I'm sure we all face is that there are communities who have very short distances to go to seek employment, to seek training, to seek education, but for some reason don't take advantage of that. And we've got a whole number of examples where communities are on railway lines, they're on bus routes, they're on good connections, and simply don't take advantage of that. But quite clearly we feel that there's a real benefit for the towns and cities that we serve. I mean, Tom mentioned there this idea that people go, take the car, park and ride, travel to Edinburgh, to Glasgow and so forth. And that's fine, and it's fine for us as a business. But it's not where our business growth is going to be. Our business growth has to be with working with organisations in this room to drive off-peak travel, to drive more visitors coming into our smaller towns and cities to shop, to socialise, to drive our visitors coming into our localities. We have a very simple philosophy in ScotRail in terms of how we view visitors and tourists. We simply want to see people stay longer, travel further and spend more. It's as simple as that. And the only way we can do that is by working with groups and organisations and businesses throughout the country to make sure that we've got an offer that meets that. I want to just give you some examples of what I think are huge opportunities for the whole country. The figure I'm really interested in here is the 475 million. I have to do the promo bit about 90% customer satisfaction. But as I tell our statisticians, that's still 9 out of 10. You can increase it by 1% or half a percent, still 9 out of 10. But the important figure up there is £475 million. This will be the largest investment in rail infrastructure that many of us will have ever seen. And what that's going to do is it's going to provide huge opportunities for improved transport connections between our cities, but not only between our cities, but between our small towns and rural destinations. And there's a huge investment there. And I'll touch more on the Borders Railway and where I think in particular there's a huge opportunity for businesses to work together across a variety of geographical locations and themes and develop some real strong bids approaches. So we are transforming Scotland's railway, and you'll be aware that we're currently looking to improve the Edinburgh to Glasgow programme. And that's great at a national level because effectively that will see our intercity connectivity really raising up the bar. 42 minutes between Edinburgh and Glasgow, the electrification and all these positive things. But we are absolutely committed to working with those communities, as you see on the slide there, to make sure that where these trains are also stopping at some of these smaller towns, that we are equally seeing them taking advantage of that. And we're in discussions with a number of different localities around there already about what the implications for that would be. So we're discussing with Falkirk Council about their investment and their programme and how we can support that and help it grow. A big thing for us is about town centres, and many of the bids have a town centre focus. And one of the first things that we did was that we sat down with our senior management team and explained to them the importance of the connectivity of our railways, not just the commuter connectivity, but the wider connectivity. But more importantly, what we recognised was that we weren't necessarily able to align our investment with the investment that was happening in and around our stations. And one of the key things we did was we've made our commitment to the Towns First principle of the Scottish Government in COSLA. So what that means now is that when we're sitting down looking at our investment programmes, we are not doing so in isolation to what's happening in other localities, and we're looking to align those to maximise benefit and value. And I want to just give you an example of what that means, and I think hard examples are always really good. This was a slide that I prepared to try and explain to our senior team about where we needed to go as a business and where I believe the rail industry and infrastructure needs to go. I was down at Kilmarnock, and I'm very familiar. I'm from Ayrshire. I'm from Ayr. So I was in Kilmarnock quite quickly, but I was there and they were showing me an investment that we'd made in the station building, and it was really good. It was £500,000, working with a community group and seeing a real enhancement of that locality. But immediately beside our railway station, there were 3 75-metre high cranes working on a new college, a new £53 million college investment. And as a rail industry, we hadn't engaged with that college. And we hadn't engaged with Kilmarnock Town Centre about how we made the connectivity between the railway station that sat slap bang in the middle of that. So we could have got to the situation in August of this year when it's being opened, and I believe the First Minister, whoever that may be, is lined up to open it. But we would have been in a situation where we wouldn't have been part of that process. And we talk about collaborative working. It's just working in partnership. It always has been. We've used this language for the last 30 years. It just means working together. And that's what we're trying to do as a rail industry. We're trying to work with the local partners, with local stakeholders, to do things together for the benefit of both of us. And this is a really interesting example because it's now found its way to a parliamentary meeting in London where this slide was used to emphasise where we need to get to. I want to touch on our local station strategy because, again, this is, I think, something which is really important, and we hope that the bids throughout Scotland will become part of. We're actually introducing a scheme where we are trying to identify what is happening in and around each of our stations and to give each station a hierarchy to allow us to understand what will be happening. So whether it's about retail investment, whether it's about commercial investment, whether it's about housing or so forth, we are now getting a picture of that across the country, working with every local authority. And that, for us, will give us a framework. It won't just give us a framework for opportunities and challenges, but it will also give us a framework to align our investment with the investment that's taking place in those areas. And what we think that will do is it will support local priorities. And where big bids exist, we think it will absolutely align with the objectives of those bids. So my promise, my commitment to you, and we've had this discussion, you and I, is that we will work very closely with bids to ensure that where there's an opportunity to link with our services, with our infrastructure and with our stations, we're committed to doing that. I want to just for 2 minutes finally touch upon the Borders Railway, and I'm sure you'll all be aware of this. It was opened in September of 2015. It was the longest new railway in 100 years in Europe at a cost of about £300 million. The business case for the Borders Railway was not a rail industry business case. The business case, as committed to the Scottish Government, was the added value and the wider value that should have been achieved. And Ian over lunchtime there said to me when we were standing outside, James, we should have had the bids lined up to be in place when that railway line opened. And I believe he's absolutely right. That's what we should have done. But we're not quite there as a country yet. What we do is we focus on delivering the physical infrastructure and then think of the potential benefits that we get. And I think there's huge benefits. And as you see there, there's an expectation of £33 million going into the Borders as a result of this on an annual basis. There are thematic groups that have already been established, and I'm fortunate to be involved in that. So not only does ScotRail operate and run the trains in the Borders Railway, but we are part of the blueprint programme to make sure that as we go forward, some of the wider development opportunities are met. The travel editor of The Guardian, just an article just before Christmas there, when they went down and visited, said Borders, the new Scottish destination. And I firmly believe that it clearly is a new Scottish destination because we've got a new railway line there. But in the discussions I think John was having at the breakout session this morning around tourism was that we have this thing where we sort of compete with each other, and one area says we've got the best infrastructure and the other area says we've got the best infrastructure. And ultimately what we want to be realising is that we work together to provide the quality of service. But I think there's an absolute case for organisations to take the lead. And this is an example. So ScotRail as an organisation, we realised quite early on that there was a real aspiration within the local area for local visitor attractions and destinations to work together. But they weren't used to doing that. So we've taken the lead on that, and we have actually created a guided tour programme in the Borders area, working with a company called Rabbi's to effectively do a pilot this Easter and through to the end of April, where we're giving a joined-up ticket to bring people from all over the country down into the Borders, and then Rabbi's take them on a tour of a whole variety of different locations. Now just think about that. That's a railway company has created a tour that involves all the local businesses in that area. So they didn't actually really have to do anything other than make themselves available. And I think there's a huge opportunity in the Borders locality for that to be built upon and in other areas. It's already been significantly successful. We're seeing bookings way above where we'd anticipated them being. But I think overall there is a huge opportunity for the bids programme in the Borders, whether that's in the individual localities, in the towns of Galashiels and Hawick and Melrose and all these places. But I think there's a real need for us to share that message. Tom talked there very much about Dunblane and the strength, and lots of time I've got that strength. But the strength is in businesses coming together. What we find is it's very difficult as a company when we approach individual businesses, because that's a risk to them to make something available to us. So we're really committed to making sure that we work with groups. We believe that taking that one-team approach promotes the Scottish Borders and promotes the opportunities that a bid has, whether that's in the wider promotion and marketing, whether that's in working with us around tours and offers, whether that's the wider visitor offer and promoting what can happen there. And it's also fundamentally just about local business opportunities. We really, really believe strongly that the bids approach is something that should be supported by all of the key infrastructure and service providers. We are delighted to be invited here today, and I'd be delighted to take questions later. Thank you very much.